Hello, everybody. Welcome on in to the 2022 edition of our Baseball Forecaster release party. I'm Ryan Bloomfield. I'll be your host this evening for the next hour plus, maybe, depending on how many of you all decide to stick around and ask questions and comments and that sort of thing. So happy to have you. This also means that the book is done and out in mailboxes, which is always a huge lift for not only the three gentlemen on the stream with me tonight, but our entire staff of researchers, box writers, tech folks, and prospect guys, and all that. So major lift from Team HQ here, and we're happy to celebrate the release and talk about it with you all tonight. So couple housekeeping things before I introduce our speakers. This is live on YouTube, and would like to and encourage any questions, comments throughout. If anyone's listening, yep, we've got a couple comments already in, so it looks like we are good on YouTube. So questions throughout. We've got a little Q&A section at the end. If you want to leave comments, I can throw at least the good ones up on the screen. And while people are talking, if you have questions during any part of the thing, just leave a question in the chat and we'll get to it at some point during the event. So with that, I'd like to introduce our trio here. Ron Chandler, obviously have to start with the founder. How are you tonight, Ron?
I'm doing well, thanks, Ryan. It's great to be here. It's these events are just wonderful to do. I'm really looking forward to this.
Absolutely, and I think you were the last one of us to get the book. Is that
Yeah,
that right?
I just got it day before yesterday, so I'm sitting here watching everybody getting their books and posting on Twitter, and I was like, oh, well, everything takes longer in Florida, I guess. I don't know.
I was one of the last ones last year, and I'm in Oregon, and I was like the first one that I know of that got it. So
yeah.
Sounds like it. And Ray, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'll just pivot and introduce you. Ray is one of our two editors on the Baseball Forecaster. This ships out of Wisconsin. Is that right?
Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Yes.
Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. We've got a couple folks in the chat that the book arrived in Wisconsin today. So I guess proximity does not have any relation to when you actually get the thing.
It would be a boring hour, but I do have the master list of tracking numbers here. We can just go through that for everybody in the chat. I'm sure it would make for riveting YouTube content.
Yeah, we'll pass on that one. Last but not least, Brent Hershey, how are you?
Good. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing good. I am not in the middle of my next book like you are, the Minor League Baseball Analyst, which I know you're neck deep in now as well. But glad you could take an hour to hang with us tonight.
Of course, yes. I got to get back in forecaster mode, but so I'm always using it, so it's that certainly won't be a problem. Glad to be here and fun doing these as always.
Cool. All right. So tonight we'll get right into it. Kind of got three main sections. We're going to start with Ron. As usual, did a really great introduction in this year's book. He's going to hit on a couple main points of that essay, but always encourage you to read that when you crack the book open. Ray's going to talk about some of the new research we packed into the book this year, and then Brent's going to round us out with some of our favorite player boxes, both in terms of insight and cleverness, and humor, and all that sort of stuff. And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A, specific players, the process, whatever you all want to talk about. We'll kind of leave some open time at the end for that. So with that, Ron, I'm gonna I'll drive the slides while you're talking here, but I'm gonna kind of leave the floor to you to do your thing.
Oh, great. Okay, so basically the theme for the introduction this year is the incredible spike in injuries and the lost time for so many players this year. The numbers were just kind of off the roof. We saw a record 835 IL stints for players over the past year, and that was up from a previous record in 2018 of 574. So a massive spike. Now, one of the things to take into consideration with that number, though, is that that includes a lot of COVID-19 quarantines. There were actually 103 players and 1,467 days of those numbers that were attributed to COVID. And there were also another 78 players who were attributed to COVID, but those stints were combined with some actual injuries. So it's really tough to tease out the actual COVID numbers from there. But even filtering out that COVID, those COVID IL stints, there was still a 20% increase in the number of players that hit the IL this year over previous norms. Now, one of the things that we've come to find is that it's not always injuries there. The major league teams have been using the IL more for managing their roster. So if a pitcher needs a 10 days of rest, he puts him on the IL, he misses a start if it's timed correctly. And teams are doing that more and more. So even though these numbers are really high, it kind of it's more about roster management as much as it's about injuries. So we have to take that into account as well. Still really big numbers when it comes to that. And it makes it all that much more difficult for us to manage our rosters on the fantasy side. And that's shown in the next bullet point there. I've been tracking the top 300 players now for well over a decade, and how many of those players are lost to the injury list or demoted over the course of the season. And typically over the last decade or so, it's 50%, 45%, 48%. 71% this year of the top 300 players lost time, most of it to injuries. So these numbers just make it all that more difficult for us to manage our rosters. And those players who are losing that time open up opportunities for new players to pick up some of that playing time. So these are things we need to be concerned about when we're putting our rosters together. In particular, pitchers. And one of the things we looked at is how we've been drafting our pitchers over the last few years, starting pitchers in particular. So few 200 inning starters. There were only 4 pitchers who hit the 200 inning mark because teams were managing workloads after the short season in 2020. But if we looked at our drafting tendencies last year, 11 starting pitchers went in the first 2 rounds. In 2021, and 7 of them basically went belly up. They didn't return anywhere near the type of value that we were expecting of them. You know, Shane Bieber, Trevor Bauer, Yu Darvish, Luis Castillo, Jack Flaherty. I mean, there were only a handful of pitchers that did return value. Garrett Cole, Walker Buehler, Max Scherzer. So how is that going to affect how we're going to be drafting in 2022? And that's the big thing, assuming that we have a full 2022 season. And one of the things I looked at in the introduction is the top earners from last year and how we're tending to draft them in these early drafts coming into 2022. So we looked at the top 8 pitchers as far as earnings in 2021. The top earner last year was Max Scherzer, $39. But all these pitchers are high risk. Scherzer, 37-year-old, had a dead arm during the postseason last year, and he's now at the Mets, which, as a Mets fan, is death. It's just players who go on the Mets, they underperform. You know, the way I like to think about it, being a longtime Mets fan, is that when we talk about the making player projections, there's process and there are the outcomes, and even if you have a sound process, you can still have a bad outcome. When it comes to the Mets, good process or bad process, it seems to be always a bad outcome. You know, Francisco Lindor had a bad year last year, and Scherzer, given the risk factors against him. For me personally, if we get 150 solid innings out of him, I would be happy with that, but I don't know if we can count on that. And Scherzer right now in the early drafts is going number 16. So he's just slightly out of the first round. And I think that may be a little bit high. So the number 2 of last year's top starting pitchers, Walker Buehler, was a $39 pitcher, but his expected ERA was more than a full run higher than his actual ERA. And if you take a look at his player box in this year's book, you'll see that Buehler is basically a 3.5 ERA pitcher. That he's been pretty consistent as far as his xERA over the last few years of his career. So for him now to be going number 14 at the tail end of the first round, I think that may be a little bit high. I think we're overdrafting him. Number 3, Zach Wheeler at 35. Last year was the first time he ever earned more than $17 in the season. So how come we're drafting him? Number 23, still in the top 2 rounds. We don't know whether that $35 is even repeatable. Number 4 is Julio Arias. 185 innings last year, the first time he ever threw more than 80 innings in a major league season, first time he ever earned more than $10. Is it repeatable? Arias is going 29, still within the first 2 rounds. Recency bias is really driving a lot of these early draft values, and I have to question whether we're really doing the right thing, especially after last year when 7 of the top 11 pitchers went belly up. Burns, man, I love Corbin Burns. I think he's a great pitcher, but 167 innings last year, the first time he ever threw more than 60. Is that repeatable? And he's going really high, number 9 in the early ADPs. That just seems exorbitantly high for someone who doesn't have the track record of being the pitch that deep into the season. Number 6, Kevin Gausman. First time he ever earned more than $13 in the season, especially now that he's back in the AL East with Toronto. I don't know. I'm just not really high on him, and he's going further down. Gausman's going at 54 right now in the early drafts. Maybe that's more realistic for what we can expect from him. Number 7 of the top 8 starting pitchers from last year, Robbie Ray. $31 was a 7-year career high, and only the second time he earned over $12 in the season. Now he's with the Mariners. How is he going to do there? I don't know. He's being drafted right now at 44. Again, probably a little bit more realistic than the way he finished up last year. And finally, oh man, Jacob deGrom. $28 last year. We don't know what the injury situation was with him. We don't know how much we're going to get out of deGrom this coming season. And he's going number 22 right now, which, a lot of hope inflated drafting going on with him now. If we take a look at the current ADPs in the first 2 rounds, there were 11 pitchers, 11 starters who went in the first 2 rounds last year. Now we're down to 9, which at least shows that the marketplace is taking a little bit more of this into account. Garrett Cole, for me personally, probably the only pitcher I would feel comfortable paying $30 for in an auction. There's just too much risk up and down the rest of this list here. Burns, Buehler, and Scherzer already talked about. Just recency bias really driving their values right now. Woodruff, I think, is probably a better bet. And Bieber, coming off of the injury last year, being tucked in at the end of the second round. I don't know. It's tough right now because there's just so much uncertainty with the starting pitcher pool. But we'll see what happens over the next few months. We'll see what they look like in spring training, if we have spring training. We don't know what's going to happen with the work stoppage. Thinking back to 1994, 1995, I remember when the players finally came back. We had 3 weeks to get ready for the regular season, and so they crunched 5 months worth of activity into 3 weeks, and over 100 players switched teams, and players really couldn't get up to speed that quickly, which is going to cast even more uncertainty on the upcoming season. So just things to think about as we move ahead.
Absolutely. Great stuff, Ron. And I, as someone who drafted a lot of Luis Castillo and Aaron Nola last year, this really strikes home for me because those were 2 of the 7 of the 11 that went belly up. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. We've got a comment from Jeremy here. His favorite NFBC strategy is to start with hitter, and then a couple starters, which is kind of a little bit in line around with what you're saying here, just given the warts of basically all the holes you can pick in almost all these guys up top.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell you, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, we were talking about waiting until maybe round 7 or 8 before you draft your first starting pitcher. And that is not an unreasonable strategy right now. It's because of all the uncertainty. I think there are a lot of pitchers in the mid rounds there who could provide profits. So yeah, I would see what's out there and see whether you can construct a roster doing that.
Cool. All right, Ron, really appreciate it. And yeah, anyone who has the book and has not read the full intro, these are just two of the points that Ron gets to with the starters and injuries. Please go through and read that one. It's fantastic. All right, Mr. Murphy.
Ron, before you go on mute, I want to riff on your last slide for a minute, because there's a topic here worth discussion. I'll put you on the spot a little bit. You were talking about the 95 strike and the player movement afterwards, and the flood that came after the work stoppage, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's different about 1995 is we didn't have ADP in 1995, right? So one thing I've been wondering about, that's not directly relevant to your intro here, but since you got the ADP numbers on the screen, we're not going to have a smooth bell curve of player movement this winter, right? We had our binge early in the season. Now we're in like the Apollo 13 re-entry period of player movement with absolutely nothing, and there's going to be a binge on the other end. So there's not like a normal shaped opportunity for the ADPs to adjust to player movement. Like, we're all drafting with exactly the same information now, and then come God knows when, hopefully closer to February 15th and March 31st, the floodgates are going to open again, and ADP that has been kind of cast in stone is going to go totally liquid on us. What does that what does that do to you from a like draft auction mindset, that we're going to get all of that very late news, that we're all going to get very attached to this ADP, and then we're essentially going to have to rip it up, aren't we?
Yeah. Something, I think that's good. I think it's good
Totally.
That's going to happen, because that's going to show us how variable these ADPs have always been. And basically what these ADPs represent is what it's going to cost for you to acquire each of these players. And that cost now has got a very wide error bar, especially if there's going to be a massive player movement just before opening day. The ADPs are not going to have time to adjust to any of those things happening. So I think we have to more rely on our projections and the information we have of what we believe players are worth, rather than relying on what the marketplace is telling us we should be paying for them. And if that means that you should be drafting Corbin Burns in the fourth round, or that's what your numbers are telling you, then rely more on your numbers, because taking both the skills of the players as well as the risk factors into account when deciding when to draft players, I think that is the way we're going to be drafting, rather than relying on the ADPs like we tend to do.
So it's a get your guys season. Is that kind of
get your guys? Yeah, identify who you think are the optimal players to build your roster around, and then just get them. If the ADPs of the average auction value say someone is worth $25 and bidding heads up into the high 20s, and you think this is the guy that I need, you pay 30 for him. You pay 32 for him. There are very few rules right now, because this is going to be highly variable going into 2022.
Thanks for indulging my tangent. Just a little deviation from the agenda there, Ryan.
It's all good. It's all good.
All good. I know our playing time today writers they're going to need a long vacation here these next few months, and then it's going to be a tidal wave.
Yeah, they better be icing their typing fingers for a couple of months, because they're eventually going to level out. All right, so my stated purpose here, other than just firing random questions at people, was to talk a little bit about the research abstracts section of the Forecaster this year, which took a little bit of a different. There are a couple of themes here. We took a little bit of a different approach than we have in past years. Typically, this section is primarily a greatest hits of research that we've already run at BaseballHQ.com, and kind of putting it into a single form, collected, here's our best research, and kind of framing some discussions by putting it all in one place. We did this differently this year, where there's more first run research here in the book than there usually is, and we'll have to trickle it out to the website during the lockout here. But, so if those of you who are familiar with reading the research section, you might normally nod along and be like, I think I've read this at Baseball HQ this spring or summer. And you probably did. This year, a lot more fresh stuff that is first run in the book, and we'll get to the website later. But there were a couple of themes here. One thing that Ron in particular has been banging the drum on for a number of years is we have our Encyclopedia of Analytics section before the new research in the book that we've been running for so many years now, and it's a collection of all of our historical knowledge going back, some of it being 20 plus years old, some of it being more recent. And every year, Ron and Brent to do we don't just rerun that section. Ron and Brent go through it with a fine-tooth comb and determine what's still relevant, what needs to be refreshed, what we should put on the shelf until we can get back to it. But Ron's been banging the drum for a while that there were certain pieces in there that really needed to be revalidated because of the changes in the game, or just that it's been a long time. And we've started doing that this year. Patrick Davitt led off the statistical abstract section, page 71, if you're reading along at home, with two pieces. One that was about checking on the persistence of ground ball, line drive, fly ball rates. We hear so much about the launch angle revolution, and his goal there was to go and see sort of macro level throughout the game. You'll have some of our assumptions about these numbers been invalidated. Quick answer, they haven't been. Individual players, of course, tend to change their numbers to buy into the launch angle revolution, but globally, things haven't really changed in the last 15, 20 years. It's about 45% ground balls, 25% liners, 30% fly balls for hitters. Pitchers are more like 48, 27, 25, but those numbers haven't really moved. So it was good to revalidate that and make sure that some of the assumptions we make on those kind of numbers are still relevant. And then similarly, looking at the impact of walk and strikeout percentages as leading indicators for hitters. I've been around long enough. Brent's been around for long enough. Ron certainly will remember the days when we thought back in the 90s when Ryan was
in diapers
that walk rates were really important for guys to keep a good batting average, and we've since learned that they're not. But again, with the selling out for power trends and that sort of thing, we wanted to go back and take a look at what the importance of these numbers are as leading indicators. And Patrick did some really good number crunching. The takeaway I liked as sort of a pull quote from it is that batters who strike out a lot or walk a lot tend to hit for a lot of power. Hitters who strike out a lot and walk a lot don't. The and or the or makes a lot of difference there. There's more detail in the essay, but in terms of a pull quote takeaway, that was one I really liked. So then we could move into some of the newer pieces. A couple of Eric Floramonte specials. Eric does fantastic work for us in the keeping us fresh research department. I really like the premise of this one. He took a look at hard hit fly balls as a skill, and he answered a question that sort of I hadn't brought to my conscious to articulate, but when I read it, it was sort of something that I know I always did want to know the answer to this question. I just had not, realized I needed to ask the question. So if you take a look at our expected power metric, XPX, it's based on two things: hard hit rates and fly ball rates. But there's a union or intersection problem there, right? Is in that XPX doesn't necessarily capture the situation where, you're hitting a lot of hard hit balls, but all the hard hit balls are on the ground, and you're also hitting a lot of fly balls, but those aren't the hard hit ones. The hard hit ones are on the ground. And, as a result, you can look at the hard hit rates and the fly ball rates of people and take a guess at what you think their expected power should be, and it doesn't always match up. Like I actually went looking through the book this afternoon looking for a good example, and a good one is actually Yordan Alvarez on page 87. If you look at his numbers there, neither his fly ball rate or his expected, his hard contact index, the HCTX, which is how often you hit the ball and how often you hit the ball hard, regardless of ground ball, line drive, or fly. And then his fly ball rate, Neither one of those are particularly remarkable. His HCTX in 2021 was 118, so that's 18% better than average. And his fly ball rate was 39%, which is, as I just went through in the previous research about the stickiness of ground ball, line drive, and fly, that's, well within the, the fat part of the bell curve. Neither one of those numbers screams great power, but XPX gives him really high marks for that. His expected power is over 150 and has been, and also was in 2019 in our last full season. What that tells us is he does what I was getting at in the intro. Well, he hits, not only does he hit the ball hard and hit fly balls, he hits hard fly balls as opposed to hard ground balls or line drives. And the research that Eric was doing here was trying to determine how sticky that is. And it's somewhat sticky. So we don't necessarily, just because Alvarez's XPX looks like it's a little bit out over its skis relative to hard contact and fly balls, doesn't mean we should project a major pullback, maybe a little bit. But I thought this was cool. And like I said, it was a question that until Eric framed it, I'm like, yeah, I kind of have always wanted to know that. Eric's other cool new piece of research, building on his QBAB, quality of batted balls, which was a major research piece from last year that we put right into the player boxes because we thought it was so cool. This was taking a look at exit velocity, which, as a reminder, is the first letter grade in QBAB. And he was looking at how stable that is and what can predict movement in a small sample size, or how quickly we can react to changes potentially in season in quality of batted ball, exit velocity specifically. The pull quote here that I really liked was that even one single batted ball that a batter hits that's in the top 10% for exit velocity is a surprisingly good indicator that there are more good outcomes, more hard hit balls coming, which I thought was pretty cool. It literally allows you to do a little bit of scouting from the highlights, right? Just see a 440-foot home run or a screaming, gapper or something like that. Be like, oh, okay, very, very short term, maybe it's worth a little bit of an uptick. So I like stuff that, you can, scribble something on while you're watching highlights or something. So those are a couple of things in the new research area that I wanted to hit. And then the other good news about the research section this year is, for the first time in, Brent, was it 3-4 years, something like that, we actually brought back the gaming focus section of the research area.
Yep. It was something. It was along those lines. 4 or 5 years, actually. Yes.
Cool. And the idea here is, less, pure analytic player research and more strategic topics, that kind of stuff. Ed DeCaria did a lot of heavy lifting here. He had a new framework for fab bidding that he rolled. We did the theory and concept behind in the forecaster, and then we're going to follow up on the site this spring with some actionable ways to put that into practice. Even, I think, some spreadsheet, worksheet kind of things that you can use to help determine your fab bidding number, levels, which to me has always been, for a long time now, one of those remaining holy grails of, there's got to be a way we can put some science behind this as opposed to just, pulling numbers out of thin air, which I swear, I've been doing since the beginning of time. And, it's one of those nuts that nobody's cracked. And I think Ed's got a formula here that's going to bring us closer to that. So I think that's pretty exciting. And then a couple other things. Bob Berger had a contrarian roster building strategy, kind of the theme being, put aside the idea of trying to draft for perfect balance. And, when in these slow drafts, these deep drafts, don't resign yourself, but actually make it a goal to build either a stronger pitching staff or, hitting lineup, and use that as the base of your team and try to, build one as a really strong foundation, and then, limp closer to average with the other one and have it lead to better results. Also, our friend Todd Zola, we went to him specifically. I pinged him in September and said, Todd, in this day and age of multi-position eligibility, I know it's something you've done a lot of research about. We need the opus on positional eligibility here because it's such a relevant topic. You know, how much more should you pay for multi-position eligible players? How do you collect them? Which positions matter? That sort of thing. And Todd completely killed this one. This was exactly what I was looking for when I went out and sort of commissioned him for this. Then the last one I highlighted here is back to Ed DeCaria. This is one that did run on the site back last spring. We rolled it out in March last year, where Ed did a ton of research last year on diving deep into ADP and basically figuring out how to better use it. And he followed that up on the site with some very granular data from the NFBC ADPs and how to specifically put it into practice. And we have plans to do the same this spring. Again, going back to the conversation with Ron at the handoff there about what the post lockout effects of ADP are going to be. Maybe this isn't going to be the perfect year to roll this out, but we'll do it anyway. And we'll see what happens with that, because it's going to be a weird year, and more tools at our disposal are always a good thing.
Yeah, that Ed piece, and I put Tom Mulhall's comment up there, and also Richard, big fans of the ADP piece. Because one of the things that I use ADP for is, what's the percentage chance that someone's going to be available at this draft pick, and or the next round? Can I wait? Is it, does it go from 60% chance to 30% chance? And I know we've had in the forecaster for a while now. We can kind of estimate that based off of like min and max pick. It's very shrewd. And what Ed did with this is basically, it's a lot of work to like scrape the data. I think that's kind of the harder part, but he basically looked at every single day of ADP, and you're able to actually build really accurate models of the chance that a player will be available at what draft slots. So super interesting stuff. And of course, Eric Florimonte, a special shout out to him, is definitely always on the cutting edge with some of the stuff that he does. So, yep.
No doubt. So, yeah, I know Brent and I were really happy with how the section came out this year. So, especially with this winter of not having the player movement to react to, immersing yourself in the research section is a good way to pass some cold December and January nights.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it is probably a section that doesn't get looked at as much as like the box. People run to the boxes. People run to Ron's essay. Go through and read those this long winter. So, thank you, Ray.
Thank you,
Brent.
Yes, sir.
A lot of boxes. That's what a lot of what the forecaster is known for. Everyone, I put a little tweet out from the HQ account, and what's the first box you're going to look at, and everyone, different people. So what you want to do is just go through a couple interesting guys and kind of explain the process while you're doing that. So go ahead.
Sure thing. I know, I think you're right. I think a lot of people, the first thing they do when they get the book is look up, or what I often had done before I was editor, is always look up the guys on my keeper list, right? Or on my keeper considerations. What does the forecaster have to say about them? Of course, we spend a lot of time deciding kind of what goes in those boxes, try to keep them somewhat consistent, but also change it up as trends and new metrics come out. So it's I feel like we're in a good place with them. So I'm just going to walk through half a dozen here or so, pick out some points that stood out to us, and you can kind of also use it if you're not as familiar, as sort of a how-to kind of use these from time to time. So anyway, we'll start out with Teoscar Hernandez. And when I got this one, when this one came through to me, I mean, it was obvious to me that I didn't have Hernandez on any of my teams in 2021, because I didn't realize just how good he was. But of course, our question always when we're putting the player boxes together is, for someone like Hernandez like this, can he sustain it? And the book says, the box says, it leans yes, that he can. First, we think about his team context. There where I've highlighted the runs and the RBI. I mean, he's in the middle of an awesome lineup, of course, hitting fourth or fifth all year with Springer and Bichette and Vlad all in front of him getting on base. So that's a good thing as we think about 2022. That's as far as we know is going to stay the same. The second is, there's several valid points of support for this kind of 2021 breakout. The contact gains, I think, is one of the biggest and sort of most surprising there in the contact rate column, where he was in the high to mid 60s contact rate for the past 4 years, and in 2021 shot up to 73%. That's not an elite contact rate, but when you're hitting the ball as hard as he is, as we'll see as we go through here, that's a really significant jump. And the thing that really stands out is that it's not just it's not just he got lucky for one half of the year or whatever. When you look at our first half, second half splits, he held that was consistent, a consistent kind of characteristic for him throughout the year. Moving to the right, in a similar way, his line drive rate went up really to an elite level. And this isn't just one spot, but again, it's the shortened season as well, and it's a full 800 at bats basically. He's been in that 25 to 26 line drive rate, which is going to do good things for his average. Obviously, is that going to be able to sustain fully for next year? I mean, there'll probably be some regression there, but it's still a good sign. And then the last part, the final box off to the right there, all the StatCast data agrees with this too. I mean, he's had an elite exit velocity, the first letter QBAB there, as we said, for the past 4 years. The rest of the QBAB scores look really good, and his barrel rate, have been in that double-digit kind of elite level. Barrel rate averages out at about 8% over MLB, so he's quite almost double that for his percentage of batted balls that are barrels. So as I said, I mean, sure, you look across the bottom line there, our first pass projection, sure, there's going to be, maybe the contact rate comes back a bit. XBA says that probably he's not a 290, 289 hitter, but there's still lots of good things going on there. It sort of justifies, I think, where he's going right now, kind of in that pick 30 to 35 range. So, such as Teoscar.
The other thing I'll just add is it's super impressive, the contact rate going up while the league-wide trend is that strikeouts are going up too. So he's doing this while everyone else is striking out more often.
Yeah.
Which makes it really, really impressive, because that contact rate number is not indexed to league average. That's just a raw how often is he making contact. So all right, next up
is we're going to these older players that if you're in the right spot, in the right draft, can be really valuable. But I think one of the most interesting thing about this box is we all know that Vaught is a student of hitting, but that he underwent this big transformation last year, which has been talked about a lot, and is really amazing. And you can see it really here in the box when if you look across and just compare the two light blue lines, which again is the 2020 season and the first half of 2021, they're really there's parts of them that are very similar. The production obviously is very close. The plate appearances are just about spot on. Some of the metrics are close. And then you get down to the green box, which is sort of the second half, and you can see his swing plane changed. There's a spot there. You can see where his ground ball to fly ball rate almost kind of flipped first half to second half. And sure, there's more swing and miss here. His contact rate went down to 69%, but his expected stats over that period. I mean, the expected BA of 292, the expected home runs of 28, and he actually hit 271 with 25 bombs in those 320 at bats in the second half, and all the while kind of with a barrel rate also that has gone up. Another and his exit velocity too, really maxing out there. So we realize it's just 320 at bats, but again, our initial projection on that bottom line there We obviously think he can do something similar to that, even at his age. I think knowing that he's at this age, kind of a student of hitting, adjusting, goes into some of the confidence we have that Joey Votto will be able to do this again. And he's really one of those players that I think because he's older, kind of seen on the downside of his career, often falls farther than he should in drafts.
Yeah, this box was one of the ones I got to write and break down. And the thing I loved about it was you go back and, obviously, as Brent mentioned, Votto's a longtime student of hitting and, one of the smartest hitters around, and has, done a lot of things in his career. But the thing I loved about this box was it's the numeric representation of exactly what the heck the guy said he was doing. Right? He's like, this is what I'm doing. I'm in the ball in the air more. I don't care if I strike out more. This is how and it's a different approach for him than traditionally in his career, but like he did exactly what he said he was going to do. And, this is like the graphical representation of like, I practically could have put a Votto quote in the box and it would have, done the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and the best part about it is this transformation really ups his value for us as fantasy players. I mean, he's doing. I mean, always was an OBP god if you were in an OBP league, but even traditional leagues where home runs, RBIs, and stuff. It was obviously, as you can see, his value had gone down, and now it's certainly has rebounded, even as one can still do, I guess, at 38 years old. So.
It's funny. Votto's like the poster boy, going back to what Ray was talking about earlier with Patrick Davitt's essay on, walk rate and batting average. Like that's the guy who I think of is Joey Votto. You hear a lot, has the great walk rate, but unless OBP is a category for you, it's actually not really doing much, and it's not really related to batting average. So yes, this version of Votto was very fantasy friendly.
Yes.
All right. Ooh. Okay. So switching gears a little bit.
We are totally switching gears, and believe me, I can feel the groans from here. From all of you or all of us that's rostered Keston at some point. But I hope you'll hear me out for a second. No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. That was terrible. But one of the things Ron has preached for like 36 years. Is many times it's just best to just start the season with a clean slate, right? Try to let go of the biases we have, the past experiences with these players as best we can. And so we're going to kind of test that now with Keston Hiura. And, there's no doubt there's serious problems here with the contact rate, these red boxes. The red box to the right is a contact rate. And I mean, it's straight down. And the batting average is pretty much the same way. And I looked it up. And to hit 127 in the second half, you have to go. He went 18 for 142. 18 hits and 142 at bats in the second half. And obviously, it's affected his playing time and his power. But I want you to look at the stuff in the green. If you think about what some stats and metrics you're going to look for just a pure power hitter, it becomes a little bit more interesting. I mean, when compared to 2020, his line drive rate and fly ball rate is up slightly, along with his exit velocity, and his barrels went up. And both of those are really sitting at a very good, if not elite level. I mean, his expected power, which we had talked about as a metric earlier, is 33% above league average. Now, are we calling a Hiura turnaround, in 2022, where he's going to go back to kind of the big hyped prospect with the great hit tool that somehow disappeared? No. And, as a $4 projection over 250 at bats, I think says that. And if you have some sort of keeper decision, I mean, is this going to be enough? You should hold on to him. I highly doubt it. But if you're drafting now in like one of these 50-round draft and holds or a draft champions league, I mean, he's going to come cheap, right? He's going around pick 415. And at that point, I mean, why not take a shot? I mean, it's really, this game is about finding these players kind of undervalue, as we're playing with the player acquisition via the draft. And he's a guy that at that sort of price, really, I think, is interesting. And again, in editing the book and when this one came across to me, I was really surprised, again, doing my best to kind of wipe the slate clean, to see those power metrics there that, you didn't have to squint too hard, that they could be useful, either in 2022 or at some point in the future. So that's my Keston Hiura pitch.
Well, that last point's a good one, because everyone moans when they hear Keston Hiura, and that's the market price. Like, no one wants anything to do with him. And flip side of that is it costs nothing to find out if there's something there.
Yeah, 25.
Go ahead, Ron.
No, I was just going to say 25-year-olds just don't suddenly lose their skills. I mean, they're still there. We just have to find them back. Once you display a skill, you own it, right?
Somebody said that.
Somebody.
Yeah, and as long as we're using the classic tropes, I was going to say I believe what we used to say for the having the short memory with these guys is statistical pieces of meat, right? But I think in the age of I wrote something last year that in the age of being more sensitive to player mental health and that sort of thing, we're not doing that anymore. So we'll just say we have short memories.
Yes.
All right, so pitchers.
Yes, let's move to the pitchers. Tarek Screwball is kind of one of our favorite pitchers for a 2022 breakout. And this one's pretty much all about the second half. The improvement he showed there. And it's interesting because, of course, his ERA, the blue box to the left there, stayed the same first half to second half, right around 4.3. But yet, all the other indicators ticked up. And as we go across the boxes, xERA, xWHIP, both really improved in the second half. K minus, walk minus, strikeouts minus bases on balls percentage took a leap up. And one of the interesting things too is expected base on ball percentage, expected walk percentage, which was something that at the beginning of last year, given his minor league history, was somewhat of a concern how much he walked guys. Really improved in the second half also, and that 7-8% is right around league average. And then, of course, his BPX is kind of the base skills metric that we use, really improved first half and the second half too. And anytime, this has also been kind of a longer term thing we look for, but anytime a player, a rookie in his first full season kind of improves upon the second half, kind of once he's gone through the league, other teams are familiar with him, what he throws or how he hits or how to get him out, and that player kind of improves. I think that's always something to really take seriously. And so our projection here is not pristine for Screwball, $10, but you'll see with some of the expected metrics, certainly there's some upside there waiting to be rostered, I believe.
The other thing with Screwball is interesting, just kind of a larger point, is there was a little bit of a pitch mix change kind of halfway through the season as well, which we sometimes try and call out in the box. We don't put the pitch level, the pitch mix level stuff in the box. We only have an 8.5 by 11 page. But that is one thing that a lot of our writers look for if we do see a change, especially on the pitching side. We'll cite, more sliders, fewer cutters, whatever the change is to kind of back up that change in skill.
Yep.
All right. This guy burned the crap out of me last year. So. Yep.
I know it's not as bad as Hero, but April and May left certainly a bad taste for a lot of people, for anyone that drafted them high last spring, which you pretty much needed to do. But we're here to tell you it's, not quite as bad as it seemed. Again, that second half, was much closer to his career norms in many areas. The X stats, the xERA, the xWHIP, the walk and strikeout rates. You can kind of note also how his walk rate is holding steady. And while his WHIP isn't necessarily expected to improve. I mean, having that walk rate right around league average, with his swinging strike rate slightly above, and the velocity is really good. I think it's fine. I mean, it all means that kind of in looking at this, as we state in the book, he is what his full season xERA history says he is. At 29, he's a solid pitcher. There's no real signs of the next step up. But again, it's a guy, probably more valuable than Hira, but along that same line of, yes, he had a couple terrible months, but he really veteran guy that put it back together in the second half. And there's probably a good chance you get him below value because of how those first 2 months of terrible stats kind of affected his whole year's line. So yes, Luis, I can't just quit you is right.
As much as I want to have a short memory with him, I think my issue would be I just can't go through all the hand wringing about, oh my God, what's the game time temperature that we went through with him from April and May last year every week? Like, oh no, it's 57 degrees in Wrigley. What should I do with Castillo? When everyone thought the problem was that he can't pitch in cold weather. And, I think Ryan proved that in his, you did a spotlight on him, Ryan.
I did, yeah.
You're the one that debunked that, right?
I did some meteorology in the thing. And yeah, I mean, it's the samples are so small with weather. It's hard to tell, but yeah, it's like, I mean, you need to be able to pitch whenever, wherever. Like, conditions can't just be perfect. So
hey, if he gets traded to Miami, I'm all in.
That 2.96 ERA in the second. It's funny. His last start of the season, he got his season-long ERA under 4. And just where it came from in May, that was thought to be impossible at Memorial Day.
Yeah.
All right. Last slide here, and then we'll open up to Q&A. A little less on the analysis slide, but just some of our favorite humor boxes.
Yep. I'll just read this, I guess. And, obviously we try to stick these in here from time to time. And Brandon Cruz, who deserves all the credit for this one, said, while groovy Shagadelic 2020 performance had many shouting, "Yeah, baby!" xERA made it clear declarations to party on were a bit premature. Even with a slight pullback, elite strikeout percentage, K-BB still swing, but high fly ball percentage continues to say, yeah, right, about aspirations for a high leverage role. So don't go bidding $1 million just yet.
And even I'm old enough to get those movie references.
Brent, that was a great impression. Very well.
I was hoping we'd get a British accent out of you.
Yeah. Brent just won the rights to the audiobook for sure.
There you go.
Yeah, that one was good. Some of these guys, it's tough to write some of these boxes. The vague middle reliever for me at least is the vague middle reliever and the studs. Like, they're kind of the hard ones for me to write. So
they are. So, testament to our great team that we have that add the life to some of these guys. So
absolutely, got to keep it entertaining. All right. Well, thank you, Brent. That was a good peek behind the process using a few of those guys as examples. Just going to open it up next few minutes here for any questions that anyone has. I saw there were a couple that came through. So while I'm digging that out, feel free to type them in. One that I did want to get to, it is a good question, despite the person asking being related to me. I think, Ray, it's a question for you. And it's a good one. So we project things like home runs. We also project expected home runs the last few years, but ERA and xERA, we do separate projections for those. Can you kind of explain why those are different? Why don't we just have one projection for those?
Yeah, sure. It's actually top of mind since I'm spending most of this week preparing the initial projections for the website. And the first thing about the forecaster projections is that I always like to point people to the universal disclaimer, and I usually know what page it's on every year, and I haven't actually had to look it up this year because I use it like 100 times. And when I get questions in the customer service or whatever, why do you do this? I'm like, well, before anything, read the disclaimer on page 9 or whatever it is. It's the one about the not using the book to swat birds and that sort of thing.
The consumer advisory.
That's the one.
Yes.
But other than the consumer advisory, the less flip answer, the first difference between expected stats and actuals generally has to do with park factors. And since in the book in October, we generally shy away from getting too attached to what team a player is on, because that has a nasty habit of changing between October and March. You'll notice that on the projection line, we don't even put the team there. And if you look at the projection files that we put out there, they don't have the team in there. So some of the difference is just not getting too attached to the environment they're going to be playing in, because we don't know yet. So we leave a little bit of wiggle room for that. And sometimes I end up tightening that up on the site. Sometimes I don't. And for a notable player in, like we'll take when Carlos Correa is going to sign or whatever, we'll run him through a projection park factor algorithm that'll change his projection, which will default to Houston to wherever he does sign. And those things don't actually change that much unless you're moving from Colorado to St. Louis, like Nolan Arenado or something like that. But the park factors, the first thing that comes to mind, and then going back to the Florimonte research on expected power, for instance, what I was talking about with Eric explaining in a whole research piece about how what he's basically proving is that some people are capable of outperforming their expected power on a regular basis and getting more mileage out of that. So we leave some room for that too, and that Ron's everything from the metric only capturing a certain percentage of the actual skill to Ron's random gusts of wind and blowing in or out on a given day. Those all, there's a lot of variability beyond even if we think we know exactly what the player's skill levels are. So sometimes they always line up when I'm futzing with the projections in the book. I'm pretty much like always for a pitcher. If I'm looking to set his ERA at a particular level, I'm almost always comparing his projected ERA for 2022 to what his actual expected ERA was for 2021. And if those are way off, then I better have a good reason why. But that's generally the baseline. If I'm baselining ERA, I'm baselining it off the previous year's skill level, but that doesn't mean I'm setting it to exactly that value either. So hopefully that's not too rambling an answer.
The actual stats that the players put up have a certain amount of noise, while the X stats are more based on component skills. So there's going to be a variability between the two. And I think the projected actual stats versus the projected X stats provide a nice range of potential outcomes. So it gives us a little bit more information, I think.
All right, Brent, this one's for you, more on the prospect side. And we do have I believe a specific list for this for 2022 only prospects, but anyone that caught your eye while you're in prospect mode.
Yeah, on page 237 is where we have our kind of list of those guys. It's always difficult because, as Jeremy mentions, and we all know, the Kelnick situations are more frequent, certainly, than the Juan Sotos of that. But I do feel pretty good about the top 5, especially that we have listed for this year, and that's Bobby Witt Jr., Shane Baz, Julio Rodriguez, although I think the playing time, when he's going to be up is probably more in question than these other 4. Riley Green for Detroit, and Josh Young, third baseman for Texas. Each of those guys has really outstanding both numbers in the minor leagues, and in some cases, when we saw Boz for a little bit in the majors, but also really strong scouting reports, and several of them too have kind of some advanced scouting reports. I'm talking about data-driven exit velocity and movement and that sort of thing. So those are the kind of those top five, I think, especially Young and Green and Boz and probably Witt are going to get a lot of playing time. I think Witt's, and Witt may last for or may not be up for a month or so. Rodriguez, I think his skill set is really explosive, but again, I think he would be the one that may be more kind of like a mid-season call-up. That's a good question.
Let me ask some follow-ups, Brent, because I want to scoop the MLBA. First of all, you mentioned Witt maybe being down for a month. I think I'll just globally say that, given the CBA and what we don't know about how service time rules are going to change, it's possible there's no incentive to keep guys down for a month anymore. We just don't know.
Possible. Yep, that's true.
And then getting back to Jeremy's question about the Kelnicks, I feel like there's always a zigzag element to this, that coming off of when Mike Trout came up as a rookie and went nuts, or when Soto came up as a rookie and went nuts. The year after that, everybody always chased all the rookies. And now, after seeing people get burned last year on the Kelnick, and the rookies in general, I think having a relatively tough time making the transition to the majors. And I won't make you scoop the MLBA and talk about all the reasons for that, coming off the lost minor league season and everything. But is this the year to, if prices on prospects are maybe a little depressed because people are thinking about recency bias with Kelnick, is this year to jump in on some of them?
Well, it's tough to say because, those people that drafted Wander Franco and waited, given a half year, were kind of rewarded in the second half too. So I think there's always kind of that give and take. Jeremy does follow up and say something about is a little leery of Witt given his draft price. And I would absolutely agree with that on some of the, again, ADP that we've seen. He's going crazy high for my liking, and whereas I think guys like Boz and Green and Young are more, you're going to be able to get them cheaper, and so around, they could be more around the time when you take a shot there that's not going to kill your 6th round pick or whatever. But I think that's always, to me, that's sort of the holy grail of trying to figure out the prospect thing, is trying to figure out who and why some guys hit the ground running and some guys struggle. It's just, you just try, I think you just, like everything else, you just try to balance that with making good roster construction decisions, kind of limit yourself to how far to go in, and then just enjoy it when it happens.
Yeah, you see, that's one of those, that might well be a holy grail, Brent, but you're not allowed to solve it, because if you do, you're going to be like someone's player development director the next day. And not
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think Witt is going. I've seen him go in like the 3rd round, 4th round of 15-team draft. So
there's some crazy stuff with Witt, and I love the profile, but I just think that is way too high of a price for an unproven player like that.
Yeah. All right, Ron, I'm going to throw this next one to you. It's Eric here is diving into Mayberry method for the first time this year. Anything special I need to know or implement? This will be a pivot from us discussing the difference between a 350 xERA and a 346 ERA. And feel free to talk Babs, whatever.
Yeah, the beauty of the Mayberry method is that we're not locked into specific numbers of home runs or batting averages or ERAs. Mayberry kind of embraces the imprecision of the forecasting process and allows us to think about players in terms of ranges of potential performance. So I think one of the magic beauties of Mayberry is that you can look at a group of players who have very similar Mayberry scores and see where they're being drafted and leverage some profit in that. So if you've got, 3 or 4 players who've got a five power and a 3 batting average, and one is going in the 3rd round and another is going in the 10th round, they're of essentially comparable skill, and you can wait for that 10th rounder knowing that you're going to get somebody with potential, better value that rather than reaching for different players. So what I like to do with the Mayberry and what I ended up doing with the broad assessment balance sheet later on was looking for those inefficiencies in the marketplace, group the players by those Mayberry scores and seeing where they're being drafted. And that's, I think, the best value you can get out of the system.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I use it for the most. Pitting skills versus the market. I mean, that's one of the major things. All right. Let's see. We've got a question. Oh, this will kind of be more of a roundtable. And I'll answer it first while you guys kind of think on it. But Ricky's asking, a forecaster was quite bullish on Freddie Peralta and Sandy Alcantara last year, which we were, and we're very bullish on Sandy Alcantara this year. I think we put an upside of him as a Cy Young winner. They proved to be great low-cost targets. Any particular under-the-radar guys, either that we've written up or edited, you'll be keeping an eye on this spring. Ricky, one thing I would say before I kind of answer any specific player is, and I kind of just mentioned this with Alcantara, we put up and down side projections on some of these guys who we think maybe not under the radar, because we don't know at the time of writing what the marketplace is, but it is more of skills are trending in this direction, and if this breaks correctly, this could be an outcome for somebody. So what I would do is take your book or your PDF, however you do it, and look for, they're always at the end of the box. It says UP with a colon, and you can control F that or whatever, and build that list of upside guys. That's what a lot of folks like to do, just to build kind of a list of players that we like when we went through the book process. One of the guys that I wrote in this year's book, and I gave him an upside of a sub 350 ERA, is Huascar Rinoa. I know I did not pronounce that correctly, but YNOA of Atlanta. Broke his hand in May. We punched a dugout bench, so that's not good. The bench usually always wins those battles, but it was an otherwise really strong performance from missed a ton of bats, held a plus ground ball rate, and he did that all with improved control. So I saw those kind of 3 things coming together at the same time, all underneath a 4.05 surface ERA and a 5.05 ERA in the second half. So Noah might be somebody who, if he can keep his cool and get volume, be an under the radar type guy for you for next year. Anyone else have one that you guys came across?
Yeah, I'll go. I wanted to put him in the favorite boxes, but Brent convinced me that it was too much Red Sox bias. But Bobby Dahlbeck was one that jumped out in the writing process. I think one of the things that happens, we've talked about it a couple of times in previous examples, but when we get the blank player boxes with no commentary in them and just the default projection, every now and then a default projection just makes it go, whoa. And Dahlbeck was one of those this year, mostly because of the expected home run output last year in the box. This is a case where the unique park factors of Fenway might keep him from realizing the full expected home runs. But for his 25 home runs in 2021, he had a expected home run total of 38. So extrapolating that plus his in-season improvements and contact rate, his off-the-charts good QBAB scores, especially on exit velocity, we threw an up 50 home runs on him. So that's one that we have not done a lot, Brent. I can remember one of those on maybe Reese Hoskins and Matt Olson in recent years, but we don't have more than 1 or 2 of those in the book a year, I don't think.
Yeah. No, that's another easy to see kind of first half, second half improvement from what I can remember, and certainly the contact rate is being a big part of that. One quick one for me is Frankie Montas from the A's. I think, a little bit like Ron was talking about with the Mayberry method, and I haven't specifically looked at this way, but it seems like to me that the Montas is getting drafted kind of at the end of a group there that he could really ascend through and really be a top pitcher. Obviously, he'll probably get traded out of that great pitcher's park in Oakland. But last year, he, 187 innings, 207 strikeouts. A lot of other indicators were up. He started throwing that splitter much more. I think for where he's gone, I think there's even more ceiling there, given to where he's being drafted at this point.
I'll throw one out. I like to look at teams that people don't normally look at. So you can always dig into the Royals or the Pittsburgh Pirates. And last year I was all over Brian Reynolds. I just thought nobody's paying attention to this guy, and he's really got skills. And 2020 was a bad year, but in 2019 he was great, and he was great. So I'm digging back into the Pirates again, and this guy's actually a prospect. So Brent, probably you could talk to Ronsley Contreras better than I could, but I take a look at the underlying skills, and I see a guy who pitched really well when he was called up and had some good numbers, and it's the Pirates. Nobody's going to be paying attention, so that's where you find some of your sleepers.
Yeah, and he certainly is a guy that's really close. Like you said, pitched to Double-A throughout the year. There was some injury in there at some point, but yeah, that start was really impressive. Just 4 or 5 innings there the last week of the season, but he really showed what I had seen in a Double-A start earlier in the season. Just a fastball that moves a lot and really good slider and breaking stuff, and the ability to move it around the zone a lot. And again, the fact that he was up already, did pitch that one time in September, is really close. I think is the type of sort of rookie pitcher that you might want to take a risk on.
It's funny you mentioned that, Ron, because I, playing on targeting guys on bad teams. One of the boxes I had this year was Rougned Odor, and 28 years old, $17 season in 2018, $14 season in 2019. That's all, power speed driven. But I ended the box with young enough to recapture some of that if someone lets him play, which isn't all that likely. And what does Baltimore go out and do? Sign Rougned Odor, and we'll probably play him more than any other team.
Ron's friend Sig Megdal looked at that and said, "Oh yeah, watch."
Try me.
Exactly.
Try me.
Sticking with the bad teams theme, though, another name I was going to throw out back to the Pirates was David Bednar, who, I think is actually, other than the fact that he's on the Pirates, is, a underappreciated, probably fairly entrenched closer at this point, if only because we know that post-lockout, the Pirates are unlikely to go and sign a closer. So it should still be Bednar at the end of the flurry, which, creates some value in the current unsettled closer landscape where there are so many teams you don't know who to point at. Here's one where you do.
Yeah. $5 could buy you 20 saves.
Totally.
And one of the poster boy last year, and this will probably be our final question here, but the poster boy of playing and racking up plate appearances on a bad team was Cedric Mullins, right? 30-30 season, leading off every day for Baltimore. Just let him run. We do have a question from Jeremy about Cedric Mullins, because that's going to be a tough one. Mullins is going in the first 2 rounds of early NFBC draft, so you're spending a top 30 pick on Cedric Mullins. And what do you guys think Mullins will do next year? It's a tough one.
Yeah, scanning his box right now, it's, there's going to be some pullback there from the 700 plate appearances, and I think just generically you have to expect some pullback there. That might be a case where I actually want to see a little bit of what happens in the flurry post lockout to see if the Orioles actually want to field something resembling a major league lineup this year. I mean, if they're willing to, if what happens if there's a salary floor and they have to go spend $70 million in 3 weeks? He batted lead off and he certainly found his way to his counting stats. But I mean, then again, despite 291, 30 homers and 30 stolen bases, he didn't score 100 runs, which out of the leadoff spot should have been automatic, except that, they couldn't move him around. So, yeah, I might reevaluate when the team context clarifies, but I'm, certainly the projection's going to end up calling for some pullback until then.
Yeah, at 27, I think that was probably a career year. I don't really see any possibility of it getting better from there. I mean, so regression's where everything starts. So, 20, 25 home runs, 20, 25 staves. I think we've got him at a 260 something batting average.
Yeah, 269, 25 player.
Yep.
Which
that's
still
valuable,
really good.
Yeah, but second round, that seems a little expensive.
A little aggressive.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate the insight. Ricky says the same. This is always a blast to do every year. And thank you to everyone who chimed in throughout the hour tonight. Get back to work on your prep for 2022 now that you're armed with some knowledge from our stream tonight. Anything else to wrap us up, guys, or are we good to go?
Enjoy the book. Brent will be back in another month or 6 weeks. We'll do another one of these for the MLBA, right?
Yes, we will, I'm sure.
Yeah. Speaking of getting back to work, Brent, back to your
break's over. Get going.
Okay.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks
Always
again.
a pleasure, guys.
Yep. See ya.